Hi, I'm Kate Edwards, president of Together Hospitality, and I'm very happy to be joined by Rachel. Thanks for joining me.
Of course, thanks. I'm Rachel Wagers. I am an account executive at Restaurant 365.
Now, you came from operations and you were sharing that back in ye olden times, your system for managing all of the costs in and out was very manual.
Yes, definitely. And it's something that I encounter every single day, and it's part of what the sales process looks like with Restaurant 365 is sort of uncovering this. But in the past for me, it was spreadsheets, it was manually logging payroll, everything under the sun was manual, doing Excel spreadsheets for recipes and costing everything out and manually entering invoices. I'm sure you've done the same thing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and it takes a long time. You dread doing it, and then nobody's really keeping up.
Right, and then it's impossible to have any sort of real information, which is sort of where we come into play.
That's right.
But without that, it's a manual slog every single day.
Right, and you got tuned into this operation, this company, because a friend of yours was using it. What was his line?
Correct. So a very good friend of mine I worked with for a really long time through 3 Michelin and all sorts of hotel stuff. He had just started working at a new company in Maine, actually, and it's a large hospitality company, and he had brought it on and he called it a no-brainer. That is sort of, I was in the middle of a job search, and that's what sort of sparked my interest in looking into it.
So you experienced and you realized for yourself it's very true.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What's the big pain point for the operators?
There's a few. I think that largely where people see the most pain is in not understanding their day-to-day or thinking that the way things are being done is the only way that things can be done.
Right.
There is a lot of manual entry, as we talked about, but then there's also a lack of transparency in numbers. So looking at financials that are 3 weeks after the month, which is way too late to make changes at the first week of the month. There's lots of different pain points within that. I want to, shout out to all the chefs who are artists and lovely and they want to riff. I think that it's really important to do that, but understanding the core of your business, having that recipe is really fundamental to being able to have an accurate sense of your cost of goods, as we all know, and that ties back to every other part of your business. So if you don't understand how much of, say, a very expensive item like the protein is within your recipe, within your dish, and that price fluctuates by 10, 20, 30%, how are you going to understand what that impact is on your business as a whole?
So you also have to account for all the sort of giveaway items, the olive oil, the salt and the pepper, et cetera.
Yeah, of course. And we were having a conversation before this where I think you mentioned something about
a client,
yes, who put free bread on the table and didn't account for that in their food costs.
That's
and
right.
It's things like that that trip people up, where it might not be an obvious thing, but it should be, and realistically, and it should be something people are accounting for as a business decision as a whole.
And then let's talk about invoices. When back in my day, it was an inbox for invoices. You put the paper invoice in the inbox, and then the poor bookkeeper or manager would have to go through a stack of invoices. How does that work now?
Surprisingly, that's still how it works now, which is why I have as many conversations as I do. I also have had what I call the invoice burrito many, many, many times. I've seen them walking around restaurants every single day. I'm in them all the time. Again, it goes back to people not realizing that there's another way to do it. We are in 2025 and there's incredible technology that can help you read things. So our system has 3 ways of getting invoices into a system, whether through direct integrations, through a photo, or through an email address, and we pull that in and we automatically code it. So we're not only helping your managers, we're helping probably your bookkeeper, as well as the owners have visibility across the board.
So literally a company that you engage with, one of your vendors, you might actually have integration that you don't even have to get a paper invoice. It just goes directly into your system.
Exactly.
That's huge.
Yeah, it's really big. The assumption about our product is that it's only meant for those really big operators and those big, more so like enterprise operators who have all this stuff going on and people feel like they have such a hold on their business. But with the failure rate of restaurants being as high as it is, I feel like it behooves people, even at the smaller level from 1 to 2 restaurants, to adopt something like this so that they can have as tight of control over their margins as possible.
And you mentioned a client who they're super, super experienced. Obviously, they're going to know about sort of the ins and outs of running the business, but sometimes even at the highest level restaurants, you don't necessarily see that unless you're a bookkeeper or an owner or a CFO. So for those folks, it was a real revelation.
Yeah, 100%. These guys have 2 restaurants. Well, one is open, one's about to open, and they just had no idea what their food costs were. One of the 2 co-owners, one of them is more on like the chef-driven side, one is more on the operations-driven side. The chef side was like, "No, we got it. I know what my numbers are. Everything is really good. I think we're doing great. And the other guy, who had a little bit more experience with the number side of things, was like, I actually think we're not good. And felt like from there, they had a third partner who also felt very similarly in line with the operations piece. So they hadn't done any sort of costing realistically. They did it once, which is very common.
Yes.
You open, you do it once, and you say, all right, well, that's our cost.
Right.
But today, with prices fluctuating as much as they are, and with the ever-evolving nature of the business, it is very difficult to stay on top of that, especially as an owner-operator.
Right.
When you're in the kitchen every day, when you're hiring everyone, when you're doing all of that. So this is something that you put that information in once, and it's updating for you. And you can update it as often as you want, but it is something that creates an ecosystem in which you have data always coming in and always feeding your decision-making process.
So it goes from that sort of reactive mentality where maybe you have a weekly, hopefully, or monthly P&L meeting, and you now are reacting to things that happened weeks ago. It allows you to be a little more proactive.
Yeah, exactly. Across the board, people who adopt Restaurant 365 generally say they save between somewhere between 2 and 5%. Between food and labor costs, depending on which, because there's really robust tools on both sides. That is because they have real-time information. I talked to someone just a couple weeks ago who weren't getting P&Ls anytime during the year except once a quarter. Ooh. And that is just untenable for, right. That was a 6-location group. Imagine then starting to dive into real-time P&Ls. When you're seeing these price fluctuations in real time, it's very easy to shave off a point here or there when you are looking at that on a consistent basis as opposed to getting a P&L once every 3 months.
Mm-hmm. And what's the sort of the happy moment for you? What happens with your clients?
Yeah, I think for me, I obviously come from the industry, so I understand what it looks like to go through these processes on a really intimate basis, and to do that and see someone start to chip away at that time spent, but then also be able to say like, wow, this actually really genuinely changed our business. I worked with this group out in Long Island called Pole Restaurants, and I talked to them late last year, and they were using a bunch of different disparate systems, and they had just implemented something new, and they were like, oh, we just implemented this, couldn't possibly. They called me about 6 months later, and they were like, could you please help us? I was like, yeah, absolutely, of course. Now they're in the process of setting everything up, and I've already heard from them that it's really working well for them, and starting to change the way they have 6 bookkeepers. It's really like $80 million business. It's doing a really great job. So it's changing the way they fundamentally are doing everything. And that to me is really exciting.
Right. So really helping people succeed in their business every day.
100%. Yeah.
Right.